Hello and welcome back to, well, starting on Dirt Ride 2. We'll be transitioning to Horizon 4 in just a second, but I want to talk about a little rally category that's very underappreciated. R-GT. Basically, rear-wheel drive GT cars, like the Lotus Exige or the Aston Martin Vantage here, and you put some rally tires on, give them a FIA spec roll cage, and send them down a rally stage. And that sounds awesome, but there's only two manufacturers, actually three manufacturers, competing right now. There's Abarth with the 124, Porsche with the 718, and Alpine with this A110. And that's just sad, because it's a really brilliant class. More manufacturers need to take part, so I decided to take up the challenge and build some R-GT cars of my own. Now, it's interesting, the R-GT rules are they must be two-door rear-wheel drive, but more importantly, it must have a specific power-to-weight ratio, 4.6 kilograms per horsepower. That's a very interesting rule. There's no power limit per se, but the more power you have, the more weight you have. The less power you have, the less weight you have. It's a very interesting system, very interesting in building the car, so I thought that would be way too wide of a range for my building process, but it actually turned out to be very narrow in reality. So, I built up a few cars, built up a rally stage, sent the Alpine here as a benchmark of 2 minutes 15.4, and started testing. Our first contestant is quite an interesting one. This is one of the oddballs that I threw in. This is the Bentley Continental Gt, not the new one, the older one. And, well, it's the heaviest vehicle by far, over 2 tons of Bentley luxuries going down this rally stage. But also it's the most powerful, almost 600 horsepower in this thing. It's 3 times as powerful as some of the other vehicles we'll see later on. And it has a GT3 body kit with a massive wing and splitter, so I was thinking it might surprise people. Unfortunately, it is just a little too heavy to carry the speed. It has the acceleration. You saw I was hitting 120 plus down that straight. It was very good accelerating thanks to that twin-turbo W12. But it just doesn't have the handling, doesn't have the pace as these other vehicles. It's just a bit too heavy, a bit too bulky, especially for this section here. This is a very nasty left-right uphill chicane, and it really struggles on that section. It just doesn't have the weight. It was converted to rear-wheel drive. I should make that clear, just in case you can't tell by the oversteer and the wheel spin. But it has been converted to rear-wheel drive, so that makes it a bit lighter than the standard model, but it is not a light car. It's not exactly a Lotus Elise. And to be fair, it is only 5 seconds off the pace of the A110, the benchmark, they did a 2:15. So it's only 5 seconds off. That's a very close time for such a heavy vehicle, but it was just not quite enough. I love how it drove. It was a very fun car to drive because you could just chuck it through these corners. But just because you can chuck it about doesn't mean it actually carry much speed, if you get what I mean. There's a difference between carrying speed and chucking it through. And this illustrated that. It was not fast. It felt fast because you were sliding around, but that's just sort of how it naturally drove. Yeah, either way, whichever way you shake it and bake it, it was not fast. It was fun, and it's super weird seeing a Bentley on a rally stage, but it just did not have the pace. Sticking with the big British theme, this is the Jag Xkrs Gt. Strangely enough, I tried building the normal XKR-S first, but that wouldn't meet the regulations. It didn't meet the power-to-weight ratio requirements. I couldn't get it to work. This thing, though, I could get to work. For some reason. I don't know why this worked, but the other one didn't, because this is the more hardcore racing version, but it did. It met the requirements, and once again, it just didn't really have the overall pace. There was nothing wrong with that. I liked how pretty much all of these cars drove, but they didn't have the speed. It might be because it's a little oversteery, this vehicle, but it's not crazy heavy. It's heavier than the rest of the field at over 3,500 pounds, but it's not exactly the Bentley. And it has over 400 horsepower, so again, it's no slouch. But you can see there, it just can't get turned in. It really struggles on that uphill section. It really struggles on this little dirt chicane, because you're not allowed to cut those corners. You're not allowed to straight line it like you should. It just really struggles on those tight, twisty left-right bits, as you saw there. I think that's where it lost most of its time, but otherwise it's just not quick. I mean, it was 2 seconds faster than the Continental nearly, and it was only 3 seconds down on the A110, but, you know, it's not fast. Don't worry about the rewind thing. That's just because the tracks are overlapping each other, as you can see there. They're not really, but Forza v Forza won't let us do that, so it makes a fuss about it, but it doesn't worry too much as long as you get to the next checkpoint before it resets. So don't worry about that when it pops up later on. The XKR-S, so the British just were not doing very well. You can see there, it doesn't have the acceleration, the traction was a bit lacking there. These are all running, I tried to make them all run 285 tires. Some of them may have a bit more like the Bentley, some have a bit less. But I tried to make all of them run 285 tires, and this got a lot more oversteer than the rest, which is why it just didn't have the pace. We do move to America for 8th place in the form of the Cadillac Atsv. Now obviously, this is a two-door coupe showdown for the R-GT class, so the CTS-V, the much more powerful, slightly heavier version, would not be eligible for this, even if it did meet the power-weight ratio requirements. This one, though, did. It met it, and I thought it was pretty good. It wasn't very quick on the straights, interestingly enough. It has just under 500 horsepower. So it's decently powerful. It's not the most powerful that we've seen, and it won't be the most powerful that we see later on, but it only reached about 110 on the straightaways, and that's not very quick. And while sure the straightaway section's only good on the first, third of the course, that's where the straight line speed really matters. You can see, based on the slides, it's not exactly the best through the corners either, and you can see it's on buzzing second gear all the way down that very short straightaway. The gear ratios weren't great either. Second gear is where it seemed to be happy for a bit of it, and then it couldn't figure out if third was a bit too long for the course. First didn't really exist, so it wasn't ideal, and it got a fair bit of wheel spin. But it was faster than the Jag, not by much, but by a few tenths of a second. And again, I don't think it had the traction of the rest of these cars. Because what you really need on a course like this, and that's a perfect illustration right there. You need to be able to deploy your power as good as possible, since everything is rear-wheel drive and running on nearly the same tires. It all comes down to how effectively can you use that power that you have. So if you have less power, you need to be able to use it as much as you can. If you have a lot of power, you don't need it as much. And the cars in the middle ground, like most of these cars, where they have a fair bit of power, but also not a crazy amount, the average cars, they need to be able to balance that pretty good. And, well, this can't. A lot of these cars actually can't, which is why it's an improvement, but it's not faster. The next car is from Germany. It's the brand new C63 Amg, not the black version. This is the standard AMG C63, so being proper AMG is very sideways, lots of torque in this vehicle, which can help it get out of the low speed corners if it can put its power down. Which, credit where it's due, it's better than the Jag and it's better than the Caddy. And it carries pretty darn good speed. 80 miles an hour is about what you want through that fast corner. But it isn't quite good. It brushes the fence just ever so slightly. And again, you see the gearbox really struggling, trying to figure out which gear is best to get in the red line. Third and fourth is not too bad for this vehicle. You can see there it's better at deploying its power. Sort of. It's better on the slow speeds, but once you get in like the mid-corner speeds, it is struggling. The brakes, I outbraked myself a little bit there. That's my fault. I outbraked myself a tad bit on that run to the section. That put me all out of shape and made me spin my wheels up the entire dirt section there. Was that gravel? I don't know. Gravel, dirt, whatever. It's made me spin wheels all the way up there, which would cost me a heap of time. So, partially my bad. I probably get this car to go a bit faster. It still wouldn't challenge the A110, but we are getting closer. We're almost into sub 217s, 217.3 for this one. So not bad. It's only about 2 seconds down on the Alpine, but it's still not there. Like, the extra torque isn't helping it, because it doesn't quite have the tire size. 285s are okay, but they're not fantastic for the massive amount of torque and how AMGs tend to deliver their torque, which is usually in a cloud of their own tire smoke. So it does tend to struggle in that aspect. You can see it sliding a lot more than you want, because yes, in real rallying, sliding does help you keep the revs up and carry the speed through the corners, but in Forza, it's better to keep things as smooth as possible, which is why the C63 it ain't quite good enough. We do head back to America with the Ford Mustang GT. Now, I tried to use the Shelby. That was way too powerful and way too light for the regulations. I could not get that thing to meet the requirements. I also tried with the new 2018, and that was able to do it just. This is pretty much bone stock engine, bone stock drivetrain, just with the rally tires, bigger tire widths, and of course aero, because aero is probably the most important thing here. Because there's lots of high-speed corners you can see there. Carries actually quite a good run through that fast corner. Ideally, you want to cut that corner as much as possible without missing the checkpoint. The checkpoint is placed, so you have to do some form of steering without, to crash into the fence or miss the checkpoint. But you can straight line a little bit, and that car did it very, very good with the Mustang. This is, again, one of the heavier vehicles here. It was 4,000 pounds with that roll cage and aero put on. But it is also a massive V8. So, lots of power, 460 horsepower in this thing. It is no slouch. And, to be honest, I think it's about on par with the AMG, the C63. However, I got a much better run, much faster run through these corners. I just wove it through the corners a fair bit better, which is why it was first car to break the 17-second barrier. 2 minutes, 16.2. We are now just 1 second away from the A110. I liked how this car drove. I liked how pretty much all of these cars drove. They were just enough oversteer mixed with the controllability. Turning radius wasn't too much of a problem with most of these vehicles. There were a few that were a little bit tricky, like that hairpin around the statue. Can catch vehicles out just by their lack of turning radius, so you have to be able to get that just right. But this did not prove to be too much of a problem for the Mustang. It is a bit more of a user-friendly daily, almost daily driver, air quotes, of these cars. So, it wasn't bad. It wasn't great. I was a lot better than I was expecting for a Mustang, because I think this does actually do some rallying, but not bad. Just a second away. Our next vehicle, we are going back to Germany. We're either American or German most of the time, let's be honest. But we are going to Germany for this one with the Bmw M4. This is the coupe, not the GTS. Similar to the Mustang, I try to get the GTS with the better handling, but it's just too light and too much power. This has, I think, the same engine, the same power levels, either that or slightly less. Either way, it's planning to get to 122 miles an hour, which is very good, and carrying, again, decent speed. We hit the stuff that's not ideal, and it's not a great run through there. But we didn't lose too much time, and the game was very generous with that checkpoint. I don't think I actually got that checkpoint, but the game was very generous, and I must have got it with my rear wing, or the rear fender flares, or whatever. Because this does have a body count critically, which means the tires are a little bit bigger. They're still the 285s as required, but more importantly, it gives me wider track width, which doesn't seem like a lot of big deal, but it helps you with handling. The wider cars means more stable, means better corner speeds. And it was a darn good car to drive. It's a really good car. Probably one of the better cars I drove. Not the absolute best. I'll get to those two later on in this, funnily enough. But I liked how it drove. I also built the Z4, the Z4 coupe, but that was not quite as quick as this thing. So and since I only wanted one car per manufacturer, I did go with this instead. And again, I could go faster. I could probably shave a few tenths of a second off by not hitting the street furniture. Ideally, I would get rid of the street furniture because no one has benches on a rally stage, let's be honest. But I can't. So that is a danger that you have to run, and of course these are rally stages, so you always have to get a retry, so it's all a matter of getting everything absolutely perfect. How well can you drive the car? How well can you extract speed out of it? And for what happened in the run, the street furniture, I think the BMW did pretty darn good. We do actually move to Japan with a very interesting prospect. Alexis Rcf, and more interestingly enough, it tied the previous car, tied the BMW M4. It got the exact same stage time, down to the thousandths of a second. That is absurdly close between these two vehicles. So why did the RCF beat out the BMW? For the simple fact of it was less PI. That's it. Both cars handled pretty darn well. That was very fast through there. As you can see, that was 86 miles an hour through that fast corner. Both cars were very good handling, sorry. They were both pretty good acceleration. They actually had very similar specs. They weighed about the same. They were both rear drive coupes and had optional body kits. This one I elected not to go for it because it added a fair bit of weight and it didn't add enough benefit, I would see, because I just widened the track width on my own and it got very similar results. So that just goes to show, because both wide-body cars, or at least case optional wide-body cars, got the exact same time. So the wide-body does not make much of a difference, because if the wide-body car gets the exact same time as the optional wide-body car that did not have it installed, does it really matter? So that was a almost science experiment within this course. So a science experiment within a science experiment, but there you go. The RCF, very good through the hairpin at the statue. Very good turning radius on this vehicle. I've never been a big fan of the RCF, but it really impressed me. Ran a bit wide, so it cost us some time there. But not too much, because I only hit one of the posts, and that didn't cost too much time, so not the worst thing that could have happened, not the best. We smash through there, get a good run on the exit, try to carry speed, don't get too much wheel spin. We just about get the checkpoint again, grazing it with our wing on the back. That was very, very close. So we do have, I think, the first ever tie on one of these alternative vehicle events. In third place, we finally beat the Renault Alpine A110 with the Audi TT-RS, once again converted to rear-wheel drive. Just for all you who think that I don't do that, I do make sure everything is rear-wheel drive. I thought this was mid-engine. It is front-engine. I briefly thought this was mid-engine based on the appearance. It looks sort of like a Boxer or a 718. But, this was the first vehicle to beat it, and it didn't just beat it by a few tenths. It beat it by 2.3 seconds. It did a 2:13 dead. And you can see why I carried almost 100 miles an hour. Almost 100 miles an hour through that corner. This is actually the first car that I ran. So I had very high expectations. In fact, probably too high, if I'm honest. Because it was really, really good. It didn't have much power. It had less than 300 horsepower, but it weighed less than 3,000 pounds. And it's a very short wheelbase. So the turn was fantastic, and since it doesn't have a lot of power, but it has the 285 tires, well, you can put your power down a lot easier. And that's what we sort of see with these cars. The less power you have, the more handling you have, because of the PI, how it works. And you still have the same tire sizes, so you get even more traction. That turned out to be the very simple recipe for success of these vehicles, because it was really fast, and it was really good handling. I don't think much of the TT-RS, if I'm honest, but I mean, you can just see here, it is flying. It is absolutely flying down these stages. it was damn good handling. And you can see it's just threading everything so fine. You just turn in and it goes. You think where it wants to go and it goes. It doesn't run wide, it doesn't get too much oversteer. You can see there, look at, remember how the Rcf or the BMW spun his wheels through there? This just gets on that power instantly. It is so nice to drive. And it carries some pretty good corner speed too, thanks to that downforce. So that was very, very good from the Audi. Second place does sort of disprove our previously stated theory about less power and bigger tires means better, because this is the Porsche 911 Carrera S, the brand new one, the 992 generation. This just meets requirements. I didn't think it would, because it's still a 911. But it does actually meet our power-weight ratio. You can't do literally anything to the engine, and you have to add weight by the roll cage and the wheels and the aerodynamics, but it does make it. And you think, oh, it has too much power. It's rear-engined, so it doesn't have to worry about that because it gets more traction because all the weight is on the rear axle. And then you have the fact that it's a 911, and 911s are tuned by German wizards who happen to defy the laws of physics because they have made a 55-year-old design that literally no one uses anymore, because, I mean, when's the last rear-engine car that you have seen that's not a 911? And they have taken this ancient design and made it into a frickin' fantastic handling sports car. I mean, there aren't really many bad handling 911s, but this is a fantastic handling 911. And since it has the aero, it's even better handling. Since it has rally tires, it's even better. I mean, everything about this car just makes it better handling. It has the weight's slightly heavier, so that's not great. But the rally tires, the aero, it's very good. The turning radius wasn't the best, but it doesn't matter because it has so much power. It can just kick itself out of every corner thanks to that rear-engine powerful layout. Use a little bit of handbrake to help it get around there. I mean, what can I say? It's Porsche 911. There's a reason it's been the best-selling sports car, if you discount the Mustang and the Camaro, for some time now. I mean, it was the 5th most influential car of all time. It nearly rolls. That's the only vehicle I actually managed to almost roll on that curve. Nothing else found it, but the Porsche, oh yeah, the Porsche nearly rolled it, but God, it was fast. And finally, in the ultimate place, we have the ultimate example of less power plus bigger tires equals fastest car, because we have the Tamo Rallymo. In first place was a 2:11.9, the only car to break this 2-minute 12 barrier. It's almost 4 seconds faster than the first place car, and you know what? It is the lowest on the PI scale. It's an A-class, this car. A-class. But look at the speed it carries. It carries 87 miles an hour through that corner. It has literally no power. It has less than 200 horsepower, but it weighs less than 2,000 pounds. And since it has big tires, mid-engined, and of course, a lot of aero and no weight, it is a go-kart through these corners. And sure, it has that big straightaway and that big high-speed chicane in the first half, but once you get past that, it is all cornering, and that is where this vehicle excels. It is so good through the corners. I threw the Tamo in here just as a bit of variety. It is the only Indian car in this game after all. It goes through a field slightly, and it's not a great line through there. Doesn't help in the speed department, but God, it was fast. The gears were not perfect, but since it was so good handling, it makes up for that. It makes up for that. It's very, very good. It's probably the best handling car here by far, and that's comparing it to the Audi. And that's, I would imagine that's because of the mid-engine layout. I was a little bit skeptical because, one, it had very little power, and two, mid-engine, very short wheelbase cars tend to be very twitchy. However, the Tamo disproved all critics, said F you all, and blitzed the entire field. I mean, it's a second and a half faster than a Porsche 911. It's 50 PI down on that 911, and it's a second and a half faster. And it's not exactly it's like the greatest run. This could probably do a 210 if I got a good enough run with it. I've had enough practice. But that being said, the Tamo was obscenely fast. Good God, that was fast. And that is why it's a clear winner. I mean, I did not expect the lowest PI car to be the fastest, and yet it was. And that's purely because of the handling. The handling in that car was so good and had such little power, while still having enough to punch it out of the corners, that the traction was easily, and you could deploy all that 180 horsepower. Well, you couldn't deploy all 500 horsepower in the Mustang, or in the Cadillac, or in the Bentley. So there you go. The Tamo Racemo is our winner for today. I don't know what you're doing, Tamo. You gotta get in the R-GT class. You would dominate. But that will be it for this episode of Forza Horizon 4. We'll be back with more